From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. This Labor Day shortened week has been a busy one in Alabama politics, and we'll start with the ruling that came down from a federal court rejecting the new congressional map passed by the legislature in July. The three-judge panel that has been reviewing Alabama's redistricting process issued a lengthy and stern rebuke, saying that the legislature flouted a previous order to draw two congressional districts with a black voting majority or something close to it. The judges wrote, quote, "The law requires the creation of an additional district that affords black Alabamians, like everyone else, a fair and reasonable opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. The 2023 plan plainly fails to do so." They also said the court was unaware of any other case in which a state legislature, faced with a federal court order to create another opportunity district, responded with a plan that does not create that district. Attorney General Steve Marshall expressed disappointment with the ruling and vowed to appeal to the Supreme Court, saying, quote, "We strongly believe that the legislature's map complies with the Voting Rights Act and the recent decision from the Supreme Court." So what's next? While we await to hear what action the Supreme Court decides to take or not take, a court-appointed special master and cartographer will begin drawing a new congressional map for Alabama. The court asked for 3 maps to be submitted from which they will select the best one. That special master is Richard Allen, and the cartographer is David Ely. While members of Congress don't have a vote in how their districts are drawn, you can bet they are watching this process closely. Congressman Mike Rogers was in Montgomery this week and spoke to a large gathering put on by the Montgomery Chamber of Commerce. Before the speech, he was asked about the redistricting issue and said he wished the legislature would have passed the Pringle plan that was a lot closer to what the court ordered.
I'm sure the state's going to ask for the Supreme Court to grant them certiorari to make their argument. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen with that. I really regret that the map drawn by Representative Pringle in the House was not adopted by the Senate and signed into law by the governor. I think that one would have met the court's criteria, and this could have stayed in Alabamians' hands. Now we've got some special master, and there's no telling what they're going to do. And anybody that tells you they know is telling you a story.
With Congress returning from the August recess, Rogers offered an update on the federal spending decisions that are approaching with the end of the fiscal year. He described a toxic situation fraught with political brinksmanship.
The Senate went back this week. We go back next week. And the immediate challenges we have is, the fiscal year ends September 30th. We've got to pass spending bills by September 30th, or the government technically shuts down. We have passed 1 out of 12 appropriations bills. The idea that we're going to get the other 12 passed in the next 3 weeks is just not going to happen. So the question is there going to be a shutdown, or is there going to be what we call a continuing resolution, which means you take the existing year's spending levels and you continue those for a time certain, a week, 3 weeks, a month, whatever. And in all likelihood, there's going to be a continuing resolution. It's just a matter of how long and what the number is. And that's what you're going to hear all the fuss about. The far right wing of my party, who I don't like to own sometimes, but it's like kin folks. You can't get rid of them. They're kin to you. And they have some unrealistic expectations on how low that CR number should be. And so we've got some added pressure in that the Senate's passed all their appropriations bills, and they're working in a bipartisan fashion, and they're not constrained by trying to spend at 2019 or 2020 or 21 levels, which is what the far right in the House is pushing. The complicating factor now that we normally don't have is that because we only have a 4-seat majority in the House, the far right is saying to the Speaker, if you cut a deal with the Democrats, in other words, if the majority of the Republicans vote with some of the Democrats for a continuing resolution that does not meet our criteria, we're going to vote to remove you from Speaker. Now, whether they can pull that off or not is another story, but it complicates things. So that's what we're facing when we go back next week, and I'm not looking forward to it. I've been doing this a long time.
Rogers also spoke about the war in Ukraine, with the Western-supported Ukrainians trying to fight off a Russian invasion. As the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Rogers is a key player in military policy. He said fighting off the Russians is critical to the United States' strategic interests and is worth the cost.
On this idea of Ukraine, there's a lot of chatter in the news media that we don't have any business dealing with Ukraine, we need to cut off funding. I just want you to understand that is not an option. Ukraine, and I talked about this here years ago, but Ukraine is a really big farm in Eastern Europe that is not in NATO, right up against Russia's border. But every country around it is in NATO, and we're in NATO. We are the military might of NATO. Well, NATO has a provision called Article 5 that if any member nation is invaded by another nation, all other NATO members will come to their aid and push the invading army back out. Well, you say, well, Ukraine's not in NATO. No, they're not. But Russia, as Putin has made it clear, once he's through there, he's going either into the Baltics or into Poland or both. All of a sudden, we triggered Article 5, and we're sending our sons and daughters and brothers and sisters and mom and dads over there to fight. And the money we're spending now will be nothing. It'll be chump change compared to mobilizing the troops that we will have to mobilize for World War III, which is what it will be. So that's part of it. The other part, and I think just as important, is we have to be there to make sure we show despots around the world you can't just invade another sovereign country and be able to get by with it. Because we got a fellow named Xi over in China that's watching this with bated breath. If this is successful, he's going to become much more aggressive around the globe with us and our allies, and we just can't let that happen.
U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville took some flack this week from top Pentagon officials over his hold on military promotions, in protest of a new Department of Defense policy that pays for service members or their family to travel out of state to obtain abortions. In an op-ed for the Washington Post, the Secretaries of the Army, Air Force, and Navy called on Tuberville to end his hold and accused him of putting national security at risk. The op-ed reads, quote, "These military leaders are being forced to endure costly separations from their families, a painful experience they have come to know from nearly 20 years of deployments to places such as Iraq and Afghanistan," the secretaries wrote, all because of the actions of a single senator. Navy Secretary Carlos del Toro went further in a CNN interview, accusing Tuberville of, quote, "aiding and abetting communists." Tuberville responded to those comments on a press call this week, saying his hold will be removed once the Pentagon reverses its policy or the Senate votes up or down on a related law.
It disappoints me, some of the language that they use, because I am a United States Senator. I would never say anything like that about them in the newspaper. This should not be played out in the newspaper. If you need to visit with me, call me or come see me. They know where I'm at, and they have not done that. I've not talked to any of them about this. It just goes to show you this is all propaganda that's been carried on by the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States, saying y'all got to start putting pressure on this senator. They don't know what pressure is, okay? I don't feel any pressure at all, but I do have thousands and thousands of people, veterans and present military people, that are supporting me. So again, I'm not doing this for a blue ribbon. I'm doing this because they have changed a policy and a law that is against the law to do it the way they've done it through a memo. Let's vote on it. If we vote on it, I'll accept the consequences either way, and we'll take the holds off. But we're not going to do hundreds at a time. That's not going to happen.
Back here to the State House, where a meeting of the Joint Legislative Contract Review Committee happened this week. This panel reviews all service and legal contracts entered into by state agencies. And because we are coming up on the end of the fiscal year, this meeting was bigger than usual. In all, more than 190 contracts were reviewed. The biggest dust-up happened over a Department of Transportation design-build contract for the West Alabama Corridor expansion planned for Highway 43. Critics of that project, including State Senator Chris Elliott, have questioned the amount of resources being dedicated to it. But supporters say it's a critical project for West Alabama and the Black Belt. When Elliott moved to put a hold on the contract, State Representative Chris England said he would hold up all other DOT contracts until the project can move forward.
In the last Joint Transportation Committee meeting, I asked what the projected budget was for the West Alabama corridor. Do you know how much or have an idea what the West Alabama corridor is going to cost?
Well, the initial, you're seeing the preliminary design is $74 million. The estimate that was done about a year ago was about $800 million. With the additional cost, it's going to go higher. It should not go that much higher, but we don't know for sure until we negotiate each segment of the progressive design bill.
What if the price doubles or gets, well over?
We're not going to agree to that. Keep in mind this is what's called a progressive design bill, okay? You set up the initial contract, you start doing design work with us right there. We have independent cost estimators look at the cost, see if what the contractor's sending us is reasonable. And then they provide segments. One of the requirements was we wanted in what was called usable segments. So when those segments are complete, we can open it to traffic. People can start moving, using it immediately while they're working on different segments. So this is, keep in mind, a 75-mile project. So it was important to us to make sure that those segments could be opened and used by the public as soon as possible. So if we start going along and it just gets out of hand, we won't agree to the price.
I'm in a position to start holding up all these contracts because I don't want to pit different areas of the state against each other and then say, well, this project's more important. So once again, the Black Belt, where there are a whole bunch of poor folks, a lot of black folks, are now having to wait to see if they're worthy enough of the same investment that goes in other parts of the state. So I'm just telling you, if we're holding up contracts for the West Alabama project in the corridor and we're starting to slow that project down because of money, then I'm gonna start doing the same thing for the rest of them. Because I've got to advocate for my area too. I got the same complaints, we got the same issues, we got the same problems. So, and I'm gonna say that my folks are just as important as anybody else in the state.
We've agreed that Senator Elliott, the rules of our committee will stand that this will be held, but the agreement is that you will sit down and talk with him and maybe the three of us and any of us others that want to come next week and come to an understanding. The goal is to sit and have questions answered, and then the whole will be dealt with.
And in the best interest of transparency and trying to understand the contracts, I want to put a hold on all of them until you speak to Senator Elliott to make sure that his questions are answered.
Okay.
And then once that occurs, then I think we can figure out a way to move forward.
I'll speak with Committee Chairman Dan Roberts in more detail coming up here in a bit. A key civil rights anniversary is coming up next week. The tragic bombing of a Birmingham church that killed 4 little girls happened 60 years ago. Randy Scott reports from Birmingham as the area prepares to mark the solemn anniversary.
September 15th, 1963. Service is about to begin at Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. A group of girls go downstairs to get ready.
That's when I heard a loud sound, boom! And all I could do was holler, Jesus! And I called Addie, but she didn't answer. So I didn't know what had happened to them because I was blinded from the debris rushing in. on me, 'cause they was standing by the window, and I was crossed from them by the sink.
Sarah Collins Rudolph was seriously injured by the bomb blast. Her sister and 3 other girls did not survive.
They had to remove my right eye, and I have a prosthetic, and it's always remind me of it, just seeing it all the time and think about it all the time. That's something that I would never forget.
60 years ago, the 16th Street Baptist Church was placed into history due to tragedy when a bomb went off in the basement of this structure, damaging it, but worse yet, killing 4 little black girls. 60 years later, that pain is still being felt.
I was injured for no reason at all, for no reason at all, and also those girls were killed for no reason. They should be still alive today if it wasn't for so many people that racist.
It was that event that led people to see how savage things have become and the extent to which people will go through to try to prove a point, so to speak, or to try to maintain a status quo of segregation.
As the 60th anniversary of the bombing approaches, steps are being taken to help people cope with it decades later. Bethel Baptist Church, once led by Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, is hosting a conference addressing this PTSD.
They're coming to study this history and to understand that there is hope, and that Birmingham is that proverbial balm in Gilead, and that we do offer healing for all the people.
A conference called There Is a Balm in Gilead - Healing from the Events of 1963. The purpose of that event and that conference is to help people who are either bystanders or perpetrators or victims of the violence to come together to heal. Because there are a lot of people who still have not healed. 60 years later, they've not been able to talk about it in a constructive way.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Joining me next is State Senator Dan Roberts of Birmingham. Senator, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks
Well,
for having me this week.
So you are the chairman of the Joint Legislative Contract Review Committee, and this is the committee that reviews the range of contracts that state agencies enter into. And so today, this week, was your kind of monster meeting because we're approaching the end of the fiscal year. Everybody's trying to get in these contracts before the end of the fiscal year. So a real marathon meeting. Talk about contract review and your role as chairman and the committee's role in state government.
I took over at the beginning of the year for contract review, and it's a pivotal committee in that it's critical that we review each state contract. And the goal is transparency. We've changed the form so that we know more about those with whom we do business with, and then require information before you might just put X LLC or something like that, and so we've been able to dive into that to get membership. And even today we had some stuff that we had to go deeper on at a deeper level to know who indeed is behind each contract that the state deals with. So in doing that, we feel like we're providing more transparency. And then you heard discussions where sole source contracts or a bone of contention for me and many on the committee as well.
Yeah, talk about that. We kept hearing that term. What does it really mean?
Sole source is a box that's checked on the forms that we have that basically summarize what contracts are about. And We have many contracts with out-of-state vendors and companies. You may have heard me discuss that today, that we have so many qualified Alabama businesses that should be doing business with our state. And so we push back when a group brings us a contract and it's either a sole source saying these are the only people in the United States that can provide this service. We question that and want to see things put out for bid so that our companies, our citizens have opportunities to do business with the state of Alabama, and it provides greater transparency for what we're doing. So we work very hard at that because our business climate, as you know, is growing here. We passed that bill you and I have talked about many times, Alabama Business Competitive Tax in 2021, and we want to do business with Alabama businesses whenever possible here in our state.
So people might be familiar with the legislative process because y'all pass these budgets that includes a lot of spending for agencies, but then that's not the end of the line. Those agencies then go and contract with various vendors. The big ones seem to be, like the Medicaid contracts. Healthcare obviously is very expensive. The prisons, some of their contracts have been pretty big in the past. And today it was the Department of Transportation. Some really big contracts, for engineering, some of the bigger projects. Really that one down in South Alabama, the Highway 43, the West Alabama corridor, there was some contention about that. Walk me through some of the questions your members had and what ultimately happened.
Well, we had very significant questions about that as in cost. We're talking about appropriating the Rebuild Alabama funds, and the Rebuild Alabama funds are generated through the new gas tax that was passed in 2019, I believe, and doing that efficiently. And so in doing that, the executive branch wants to move forward with the Western Corridor. And we had members on the committee today, they're very much in favor of that. We had others that were agnostic and others that felt like doing something on Highway 65, Interstate 65 was of paramount importance, and you see that played out in social media. So that's where that sort of came to a head today, and that was for the design build contract to accomplish the Western Corridor. Everything's in proper order for that contract to come through. The governor certainly wants to see that happen. So one member wanted to hold that contract and another member did not want it to happen. And by this time, we're probably at the 2+ hour time. We had other members that had to leave for prior commitments. This was our longest meeting that we've had so far. And it is annually our largest meeting. We had 198 contracts submitted today, and of that, 195 were on the agenda. So it was a full plate, full complement of almost every agency was there today. And we went through those expeditiously but thoroughly. And you heard many of the questions that were asked in the meeting. And look, we've got a great committee of all parts of the state that are represented there. So it came down to, on the Western Corridor contract, one member wanted to hold that because he had questions with the Alabama Department of Transportation. So I've allowed members to hold a contract individually until they get their questions answered on it. We can hold a contract up to 45 days. So I adjourned the meeting for a moment. We went back in a back room, and the members that
I saw that. Yeah, tell us what happened behind the scenes there.
Behind the scenes, we met as a group, and I pointed out it's important to me that we allow the members to still have the opportunity to hold a contract to get questions answered, and yet had we voted on that, it would have passed at the moment. So we were in a situation, I wanted to uphold the integrity of each individual member's opportunity to hold a contract. So we came to a compromise that it would be held for today. The other member felt that it was important then to hold every other transportation contract for the day, so I allowed that to happen as well. But I'm anticipating a meeting happening next week to resolve the questions that are out there, and then that hold I anticipate being released next week and the contract moving forward along with every other transportation contract.
Well, yeah, because the committee doesn't have the authority to disapprove contracts or cancel them, but holding it is a kind of a penalty to get those questions answered. How long does that typically last? Is it, Is it a week? Does it last that full 45 days?
We've had a few that have gone the whole 45 days. We have others, the contracts have wound up being removed or withdrawn. I mean, you heard one reference today in relation to a sculpture that was going to go in front of a building that I don't think anyone on the committee thought was appropriate use of funds, and that contract was removed, held, but that resulted in not happening. Sometimes we are able to communicate with departments before, and they'll pull a contract because they realize what's going to happen to it. So it's an important integral process in seeing these contracts move forward. A lot of times it's shining light on what the contract is.
Sure.
So.
Well, yeah, and us in the media, I mean, we see like you said, this giant agenda of contracts today, and we're pouring through it. So, yeah, a lot of media scrutiny, which is healthy. Let me ask you this. Since you've been chairman about a year now, are you pleased with this, the authority of the committee? Should it have the authority to cancel contracts, or is it appropriate? Are you satisfied with the level of authority contract review has?
Current law is what it is right now. If that law is going to be changed, it will be changed. And I've got some members who think there should be more authority given in those contracts. So I think we'll wait and see what happens in the future on that. But oftentimes it's what you said just a minute ago, shining light on these oftentimes can help accomplish the objective that different members have for these contracts. So it's an effective tool, but we need the media working together to get the word out on things, oftentimes about what's actually taking place with the dollars that we appropriate. It's what you said, we appropriate large sums of money, but then those are contracted out, and this is a second shot at the appropriations that we make annually in our budgets.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's why we're here, even if we've got to sit through a 2.5 hour. Well, look, you were the one up there actually working the meeting, so I know that must have been exhausting. Well, look, while I've got you, and I know we hadn't really talked about this, but we're in the wake of this redistricting ruling coming down from the 3-judge panel there in Birmingham, likely headed back to the Supreme Court, at least the Attorney General wants it that way. What was your reaction, given that it was kind of the Senate map that prevailed, and now that's being tossed out? What was your reaction to were you surprised? What was your general takeaway from the ruling?
I was very hopeful going at the end of that process that we'd come up with one of the most compact and concise maps that we've ever done for congressional districts. I was hopeful that it would be found favorably by the 3-judge panel. It was not, and a master has been appointed to draw 3 maps, of which the 3-judge panel will choose 1. I believe very much in the legislative process that it's our responsibility to draw these districts, not the courts, is what I think. And so I don't agree with the decision of that 3-judge panel, but it's their prerogative to do what they've done, and Attorney General, I believe, has appealed that, and so I think we'll see what plays out from here. I was disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll have plenty more to say about that in the coming weeks as this, again, likely goes back up to the Supreme Court. We'll see whether or not they even plan to hear it, but a thorny issue.
I believe it takes 5 judges to agree to hear this, so
right.
I think we'll see what happens there.
We will be watching closely. We're out of time. Senator Roberts, thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate you, sir. Have a good day.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is Dr. Nancy Pack of the Alabama Library Service. Dr. Pack, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of issues and everything. But before we get into it, I really wanted to offer you the opportunity to remind our audience about the Alabama Library Service and its role here in the state.
Well, our name, for one thing, is very confusing. We are called the Alabama Public Library Service, and when you Google that on Google, it shows us as being a public library. And every month we have about 20 or 30 people we turn away, and we send them to the Montgomery City County Library because we do not have the resources for public library users, nor the collection that's geared towards the average public library user. The Alabama Public Library Service has a executive board of 7 members, and it's their responsibility to approve long-range plans for us as an agency statewide in order for us to receive federal funds. And within that, our objective is to enrich our public libraries. And with that, our Alabama Public Library Service Board of Trustees do certify libraries in Alabama. Everybody is welcome to have a public library and call their libraries public, but if you come through the certification through the Alabama Public Library Service, you are vetted, and the reason we do that is in helping small communities, our communities established libraries, our Board of Trustees want to make sure that the government has the funding and the community has the support for our public libraries. So that is one of the questions we ask off the bat. Do you have a letter from your city council or have an ordinance in support of developing a public library? And that tells us that it's there. The next thing, we have other criterias that we ask the library for, such as policies and different things that they are going to do, including a long-range plan, what their goals are for their community. And that kind of vets that they will be working towards that, and it makes them think about how they will be administering their library and what kind of policies and procedures they need. Because if you're not, the Code of Alabama lets us establish that authority for my library board. The next step is Chapter 90 in the Code of Alabama, gives the authority of running public libraries to the mayor and the governments to appoint a board. Now, they did that purposely.
So on the local level.
On the local level. They did that purposely on the local level, so you would have government's function for funding and the public library board to set policy and procedure, and to hire a director who hires the staff who operate and manage based on policy and procedure and operates on the long-range plan that they have developed for their community.
Let's see. So, look, I grew up at the Prattville Library, right? I mean, I can still smell it. You know, I just grew up there. My parents were big on taking us to the library, and it was just an adventure. And just I can't speak enough of the experience. But times have changed, right? I mean, we're all on our phones. We've got Google. We've got everything. Talk about libraries now in this digital age with information at your fingertips, and how you've sort of evolved with the times.
Well, that kind of comes into what the Alabama Public Library Service's role is in providing advice and information, webinars, and training to our libraries. We coordinate with other organizations to get the best technology that's out there. We talk with vendors who do programs on how to search their databases. The Alabama Virtual Library, the public library has databases that we have, and we want people to know that they are legitimate and they provide accurate information. We do some training with our new directors and our public library staff on how to train people to know good information and bad information and take those back where they can work with. Libraries' role in today's technology world is to be able to say, this is good information, this is not so good information, and you make the judgment. We'll provide both opinions on this. But technology has really changed things, and I think it has changed most with us in our service that the Alabama Public Library does to our regional library for the blind and physically disabled. Because right now we're doing downloadable books for people who are 91 and 92. We put them on cassettes, and we have talking braille. So our agency works with that in helping the individuals over their phone how to operate their equipment. Another role that we play at APLS in the technology world is most of our small libraries, we have about 77 rural libraries that are under the population of 10,000, and they don't have an IT person. So we have a IT division that helps them and troubleshoots. They work with us, and we help them with computers. We go and install computers. We help them when they have problems with their internet and that kind of thing, and we play
And
a
so
role
if,
in that.
you know, in a community, if you don't have access to the internet, you can go to your public library and access
get that.
the internet. Yeah.
Yeah, and then APLS plays another role in that. We have, most recently, we wrote a grant through AMLS, and we are providing Wi-Fi hotspots to public libraries to issue and circulate in the Black Belt and underserved populations of Alabama. So when you're talking about our role with the public libraries in technology, that's kind of how APLS all works into that, is that, without these hotspots circulating at libraries, which has been a successful program, we have about 136 hotspots in 7 or 8 libraries. It has enabled those people who will never have broadband because of their locations.
Mm-hmm. Emphasizing the word service in Alabama Public Library service. Let's get to the issues. There's been some recent controversy over content, right? Some local flare-ups in a handful of cities in Alabama about content, sexually charged things, talking about gender identity, things like this, books that were available to children, parents having some problems with that at the local level. Talk about that from your perspective, from the state agency, and how you've responded to all that.
From the state agency, we really have no control over that. It goes down to the local level. The local level decides what materials go into their collection, and it is the local libraries that set the policies for the viewing, where they locate the materials, and it's all up to local policy and procedure. Mm-hmm. From my point of view, our point of view in my library career, there is always going to be censorship, whether it is with this topic or whether it's a topic such as Halloween, or someone who doesn't like the Harry Potter books because they have sorcery in them. When you look back through the ages, even our famed Alabamian Kill a Mockingbird author, her book was criticized and banned and was taken off shelves. And what I see is there will always be some type of censorship going on in libraries over something that someone does not feel is appropriate for their community or their child. And particularly when we're dealing with children, I agree with Governor Ivey that children should be able to use the library and encourage them to read, because that's a place where they can read anything they want to read and have a wide assortment of books and opinions. However, I think there is the parental guidance that is needed in a library, with the parents deciding what is appropriate for their child to read.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand with some of these, even just the titles of the books, I haven't read them, but yeah, pretty sexually charged, if it's just kind of readily available. I can understand some concern from parents if that's just in the children's section of the library, some sexually charged, gender identity kind of things. So talk about the balance that local libraries have to have between that right to information, right? A child has a right to just peruse and have the information, versus community values and making sure that inappropriate content is put in a different place. How do you balance that as a local library?
It's really hard to balance that because of in a library, children are going to go wherever they want to go. I mean, and you have the majority of books that are on the American Library's banned book. I did a study. I found out that most of the libraries who contained the top 10 list were libraries who were large and had diverse populations. And one of the top books that was brought to the APLS Library Board for reading and showing at one of our board meetings, only 11 libraries in Alabama had the book.
This is one of the
banned
books in question?
And only 7 public libraries had it. And of those 7, they were large libraries who have diverse populations and populations over 75,000. So when you're looking at this, there is a balance you have to work with. And I think when you look at the total number of volumes of books in a library, the number of books on this topic are not as, they're not that many as people think there are. And then you have the other point of view, where you have Christian books and you have the other types of straight books, you know, talking about straight couples in romantic situations, in your romance novels, and a lot of things like that.
So you're saying kids really have the access to all that too. They could have a, you know, pretty sexy romance novel if they ventured into that section of the library.
In young adult, don't you remember as teens we used to read books that, you know, like Mrs. Bobo Jones or Go Ask Alice or
Look,
you know,
I was all Hardy Boys. I was all Hardy Boys.
Well, you know, even you know, but you know, teens are going to find what they want to find, and the problem is, it takes the parents to provide this guidance and work with their children, because there's no way children mature at different ages, and children aren't cookie cutters. You have children who have dyslexia, you have children who have learning disabilities, and you have all sorts of children. And when you say this is inappropriate for one child, it might be appropriate for another. So it gets down to the parent talking to the child that's appropriate. You have children who want to see their family. And you see in most children's books, you see a mom, a dad, and children. And you see racially mixed families and different children with, you know, maybe we call them, you know, who have stepbrothers and sisters that are a different nationality of them. But when you get down to the gay and lesbian books, there's not a whole lot of them out there that show 2 moms or 2 dads and the child. And that child wants to see their family represented like in all these other books. You know, you have mom and dad and children here, when my mom and dad represent, my 2 moms or my 2 dads represented like that.
Right, and you mentioned Governor Ivey. She obviously wrote you this letter that
Yes,
I think
she
you're
did.
in the process of responding to. I won't get ahead of that because I know it's probably your response is going to be lengthy and long. But in her letter, I didn't get the sense that it was really about like gay couples or anything. More about like the sexual identity and driving an agenda. She also brought up the American Library Association, and that's sort of been brought up here too, and how much the National Association may push certain agendas. Do you feel pressure? Do local libraries feel pressure from the ALA, or is this more smoke than fire?
Well, ALA does a lot of things. I mean, they reach out to a lot of programs and work with a lot of organizations. And the working with censored books and their reading list and everything are developed by librarians and subject specialists. And ALA's never has their policies and procedures for freedom to read. They're out there as guidance. We don't push them. You know, most libraries have adopted them, but they don't have to use them. Very seldom you kind of look at libraries and you say, well, you don't look at the freedom of read until you get a censored book. And then you pull it out and dust it off and say, okay, we have affirmed these in our collection development policy, and we need to look at what we're doing. But ALA, if it were not for the American Library Association during COVID, to help all the United States and Canada, because they do not have a library association, they played a very important role in helping us get through the disastrous COVID. They had the ability to bring in experts who said how long germs could stay on paper. They provided us with resources on how to treat our materials when they came back, how to isolate materials. We didn't hear much of that coming from the CDC. They were more concerned with the face mask, but the American Library Association was still concerned with people, and APLS was concerned with our libraries being able to continue to operate and provide services to our patrons because we knew how valuable they were. So, a lot of the things that they did during COVID with having, telling us examples and having experts talk about isolate the books for this long, or you can put books into a microwave and it will kill the germs, and things like that, and the development of different types of services that were created have been implemented today.
What about content, though? Do they
Content-
play a role in communicating with whether it's the state library service or local libraries about what content
they
needs
have
to be out there?
No,
or is
they
available?
have no say-so in what you collect. It goes back to your local community. They have reading lists. They have tools to work with different things. Like the most recent thing they came out with was knowing your money and finances, and it was for teaching people who were underserved how to teach saving money and look into investing and how to save your money. ALA doesn't have the power to go out and say, you need this book in your library. And they do not have the funds to send the book to the library, nor does APLS have the money to say, okay, you have to have this book. For an example, during the bicentennial, we had a lot of Alabama history published. APLS sent every library copies of books that we purchased so they would have a history recorded during the bicentennial. Now, we said in our letter, we're sending this to you, and you have the choice to put it in your collection or to give it to somebody else. And they make that decision at the local level.
I see.
So ALA does not have the power to tell you what to do.
Well, we're talking so much about literacy, and there's a renewed focus on literacy in the state and getting our reading scores up. So we really need to have the library service in our local public libraries. And so what would your message be to those local communities, parents, who, if you have concerns, it's on the local level, right? Is that the message that engage locally? It's not necessarily a state or national issue?
It is a national issue because it has been made a national issue. But it gets down to parent involvement. The Alabama Public Library Service became aware of reimagining reading readiness, school readiness, and we have worked with the Department of Human Resources in Alabama and the Department of Early Education in Alabama. And what we have been doing is going in and training our youth services librarians how to incorporate literacy with the children's story times and concepts. Like you might have a stack of books over here and you'll say which book is more, which are less. We also have a piece of that program that we're working with that we have parents engaging with children at home.
That's so important.
And so, but that is a local decision if they want to participate in our reading readiness program. We've trained 90 libraries out of 205 on how to use these tools and resources, and we've given them, APLS has bought kits to go with the material, with the training, such as puzzles for people to work together on, books that they can read with their children, and to engage parent and children reading together and being more active. And I think that is the key. We need parental activity with the children and engaging with their children, getting to know their children, and deciding on what their needs of their children are.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's so important. And again, I grew up in the library, in the Prattville Library. I can smell it still to this day, and story time was a big deal. And so I just can't encourage people enough to visit their local library and engage. Sometimes these issues get fraught politically and dust-ups, but I'm really grateful for you to come on and explain the truth about the matter and how the public library service works, and how most of these things are handled at the local level. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I want to iterate too that APLS's mission is to enhance libraries, and when you're talking about our state funding and our budget, I kind of want to, if I have time, I'd like to explain how APLS uses
Sure,
state
yeah, please.
funds. Up until 1980, public libraries did not receive state aid. And we have worked from bringing state aid up from 30 cents to $1.30 per capita for libraries. Our libraries that are small libraries under 50,000 use that money to support paying electric bills, buying books for their collection, because their community's taxes do not provide enough money to support them in really operating a library. So when it comes to state aid, each library uses it differently, and they report back to me on how the state aid benefited their community. So that directly goes to library, and it serves as our commitment and our match to federal dollars when we say that we have to match with our federal dollars that we get through the Institute of Museum and Libraries. Now, when you get down to the APLS budget, we usually have an operating budget, which is minimal. We have 35 staff members working with us when APLS used to have 100. And they used to buy books for all the libraries, but we cut out doing that collection development in 1979 when the legislators quit funding us at that level. We also get money, and we use some of the state money. We have 4 databases that we buy that anybody in Alabama can access those databases. That is Homework Alabama, which is a tutoring program, and it provides test manuals for anybody who wants to go back and learn. Like if you're applying for a job and you were rusty in math and you forgot algebra, and that's going to be, you're going to have to use that. You can't use the computer. You could have a tutor help you with geometry and refresh you on things. It also, if you're required to get a GED and you dropped out of high school, within that Homework Alabama database, we have resources there that will assist you in getting your GED practice test. Also, 2 of our databases, Learning Skills and Homework Alabama, support the workforce development in helping them write resumes and helping them with interviewing processes and that kind of thing. And then Chilton Repair, it's probably for personal growth, you know. If you remember the big Chilton books that used to be in the library, and you would go look and see how to change your car's oil and that, that is now online, which you can download and put on your phone and be under your car looking at it and working on it. And that we thought was important to have because a lot of our Alabamians can't afford the new cars. And they need, and in the back of that, there are tests and standards that help you become a mechanic for a mechanical certification. The other database we have is an issue of Ancestry.com for the library edition. And you have to use that at your public library because Ancestry doesn't allow us to provide it from your home access. But of those 3 databases that I've discussed, you can access those anywhere and find materials on all types of things.
A world at your fingertips.
Exactly.
So who do I see about getting my library card renewed? Do I see you?
Well, if you are a state employee, you have access to come in and use our resources at the agency, but what you're going to find is we have our databases up and our reference staff can help you with that. Or you can ask them to interlibrary loan you a book as a state agency. We will do that. But our collection is minimal. The one thing we do that no other agency in Alabama does is we collect 2 copies of Alabama authors. And we have authors going back to 1903, 2 copies of their books. And when you're talking about one of the books that's on the censor list, Alaska, that is written by Alabama author, and we have 2 copies of that book in our collection. And other than that, we don't have children's books, unless they're written by Alabama author. So we can provide you with Alabama authors, and the archives cannot provide you with them, but we can.
Okay. Yeah, I always enjoy going to the book festival here in Montgomery because it features Alabama authors. We're out of time, Dr. Pack, but thanks so much for coming on the show and explaining
Well,
some of this.
Thank you, and we hope that things will be resolved and that our patrons who visit libraries that something can be worked out, and we can that libraries can continue to be vital in their communities and provide the resources that are needed.
Absolutely. That's why we wanted to have you on. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
The 16th Street Baptist Church was the first house of worship for African Americans in Birmingham. Throughout the 1960s, the church was a center of black activism and a staging ground for the civil rights movement. On September 15, 1963, it was the target of a racially motivated bombing that killed 4 little girls: Denise McNair, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. The bombing tragedy outraged the nation and contributed to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Today, the church is a fixture of the Civil Rights District of Birmingham and serves as a monument to the community. In 2013, the murdered children were awarded the United States' highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal. And in 2017, President Obama signed legislation declaring the church and the surrounding area the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time with more Capital Journal right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.